Well, hello everybody. Once again, welcome back to another episode of Water Tanks with CS. Today I have two somewhat special replays for you guys to watch, so to speak. I actually played these two games on my 4-year-old laptop while I was personally, physically in Brazil. So, from my perspective, and on practical terms, it was a bit of a struggle, if you will, due to the lag and various other difficulties. But I was still down there trying to get the basics down, do my dailies, and so these games happened. On a side note, for any one of you who's playing on the North American server, while you are, I guess, physically not anywhere near the servers, whether you're in Asia or Australia or Europe, or just like myself, at this point, in South America, I'm sure you can understand and sympathize with the whole lag phenomenon. Anyways, so in the first replay, I'm playing my T-25-2. It's a American Tier 7 turreted tank destroyer. The chassis of the T-25, it's you can almost look at it as a prototype or experimental variant of the chassis for the Pershing. By the look of it, utilizes the same design configuration for the suspension as from something like the Super 8, but the hull is wider and lower like the Pershing. So historically, this was more or less of a experimental and transitional design. But I digress, I guess. In game, this tank can exhibit the typical handling characteristics and overall stats of the turreted American tank destroyers, in that the turret turns very slowly in terms of handling and bloom characteristics. It suffers greatly when you're driving or when your hull is in motion. Because the turret is not fully enclosed, so you couldn't mount a ventilation module. So I guess in terms of your performance, you kind of suffer a little bit. Meanwhile, the turreted tank destroyers the Americans have in the game tend to fall short when it comes to the amount of health they have. So for a Tier 7, I have less than 1,000. In other words, when you face Tier 8s and Tier 9s that have a fairly solid alpha strike, like maybe ASU or T-30 or 704, you're sure as hell is going to suffer. One wrong move, you're crippled, and sometimes two wrong moves, you're dead. Simple as that. So a lot of people mentioned that, something like the T-25-2 is really a good camping tank. Hold a bush, aim well, and essentially play as a second line sniper / fire support platform / Overwatch platform. But once again, if you are any familiar with the way the game's played at this point, given the idiocy you notice among this player base, you will know that anything that relies on camo and spotting and vision is not exactly something that's mastered consistently by the majority of the player base. So in other words, with no people to spot for me, I essentially have no means to be a effective camper, I guess, sniper. But then, in order for me to play first line, or should I say to stay in the front and spot for myself and to brawl and to engage by myself, this tank really struggles. Too much bloom, handling is mediocre if you move. Not enough armor, not enough health. For frame reference, if you want to know how much armor, or should I say how little armor this tank has, I can tell you this. I believe the hull it's 3 inches in the front, so slightly sloped in 75mm. That means essentially any tier 5 that's elated have no problem penetrating the front of your hull at all, even if you angle. The turret, it's if you disregard the gun shield or the mantlet, it can effectively be penetrated by tier 5 derp guns, high explosive ammunition, or should I say rounds. And not only the turret top, it's paper. It's literally essentially a thin layer of cardboard, if you will. As you can see, that little lid that probably covers up the turret to protect the crew against shrapnels and debris. It doesn't do much if you take a direct hit. So this thing is essentially, unfortunately, free artillery food if they hit you. I can tell you pretty much any artillery that's tier 7 or above, if they hit you in the right place, you can be one-shotted. There's no question about it. One good thing about the T-25-2 is, you know, it has fairly solid depression, as with many American tanks. And obviously, if you compare between this and the Russians, you obviously treated armor and handling and a lot of other things, probably mobility, for the characteristics. But in this replay, I'm trying to utilize that to the best of my knowledge and the best of my ability. I went for the hill, and then I essentially try to take a lot of hard cover along the slopes of terrain. But even then, or should I say, even if you already expose the front of the turret, you essentially have to hope that your mantlet can troll people, which is kind of sad. Here's another replay. I decided to show the final results towards the end of the video, but for now, let's see what we have here. In this game, I'm in my Cromwell, tier 6 British medium tank. To be honest, you know, ultimately I'm not Cricket Baby, and you know, I'm not really a big fan of playing tanks that can be routinely penetrated by high explosive derp guns. So you routinely see mid-tier tanks. Sure, I mean, I acknowledge that mobility and agility and camo can definitely compensate for armor somewhat, but just simply given the idiocy once again of the player base, the meta of the game kind of have to adjust accordingly. To be honest, the Cromwell is a tank that really suffers if you have a poor crew. I actually played this game with my crew at almost 100%. I believe they're mostly at 99 or 98. But I guess this is what happens if you have to start training up a fresh crew from mid-tier. It's kind of unavoidable, consider, you know, folks nowadays will try to free XP away from the low-tier tanks and try to spare themselves the suffering of low-tier gameplay. So right now, I decided to quickly push down the western flank of the map using my mobility. My goal was to get a few early spots, maybe counter-scout the enemies, so I can deprive them of vision and spots. I expect my team's friendly TDs to be able to offer some cover fire and provide some support. even though that doesn't always happen. Sometimes they camp too far back or are constantly behind hard cover that they couldn't do much. They're not ready to shoot when you kind of need them to shoot. Unfortunately, even with this kind of matchmaking, essentially any tank the enemies have, if they manage to hit my tank with an armor-piercing shell, they're essentially going to go right through. I believe the front of the hull, it's 63 millimeters, and the front of the turret is not much more. And also this tank really doesn't have any sloped armor at all. So if you stop moving, if you expose yourself, you're free food. If they hit you, they're gonna pen. And as you can see, my gunner got killed, which is also kind of expected given how compact this tank is. So that the modules and the crew members are really tightly packed on the inside. I guess for anybody who has played a E50 or E50M can definitely relate. You know, in that regard, the turret front on those tanks are also not exactly well armored or well angled, and the turrets are relatively compact. So if you hit, it's likely the guys will get hurt or die. So essentially, I've been pretty quick on my feet to make sure the enemy couldn't get a good shot into me, even though I have taken hits nonetheless. And also try to use my depression, because even though this is not a T-29, which has a quote invincible turret front, or a Comet, which has a 12-degree gun depression, which is awesome, this tank nonetheless have solid enough gun depression that I can kind of consistently rely on it. So the trick is to drive up, shoot, pull back, hit and run. Just don't give them the chance to hit you instead. Or should I say you return. Another thing to do while you're in this tank is to be a flanker. Try to engage enemies who are facing your allies, especially enemies who are angling and pointing their best armor towards your allies. So not only, there's much less of a chance of the enemies hitting you, but also you get to hit them whether on their flank or in their rear, where the armor is almost certainly thinner and weaker. And when you're close to the enemy, for example in this situation, perhaps not point blank range yet, but still, you can sometimes auto aim. The benefit of auto aiming in this game is it kind of allows you to focus on moving and driving, while your turret will automatically zero in and adjust itself towards the direction of the enemy. Obviously, you will aim at and towards the enemy's center of mass, the center of the silhouette. But once again, if you're hitting their flank or hitting their rear, that should probably do the trick. You surely don't want to do that if you need to hit their weak spots, but then when you have the mobility to flank and essentially go to their weak side, perhaps you don't need to sometimes aim for the weak spot and from the front side, also known as their strong side, if you will. In a sense, the Cromwell can almost be played like a light tank. If you drive well and the terrain feature well, the tank's not only fast but agile and low profile. As you can see, I took a quick drive down the field, and a few enemies start taking pot shot at me and expose their own position. So in turn, they can give away their vulnerable position to my allies. from all positions, all angles, and all directions. And in that regard, there should be a good chance of some cover fire from the friendlies, and also a good chance of the enemy getting hit, or better yet, being taken out. To be honest, myself, it's more or less of a player who started his career on heavy tanks, and who got the basics down first when it comes to the heavy tank meta. But if anything, I would say that two tanks that have kind of been a revelation for me regarding how mobility could be useful, could compensate for the lack of armor, would be the Cromwell and LTTB. You can also probably argue that maybe the T-54 was another one of those tanks that did the trick. But let's be honest, if in this situation I was, let's say, a Jumbo or a T-29, I would have long been far more exposed, whether due to the lack of mobility or lack of camo. I would have taken way more hit. Of course, the saving grace of those tanks is, they have armor to bounce. Anyways, so towards the end of the game, I was 1 kill short from getting a Top Gun. And I guess I kind of decided to possibly get a high alpha roll or cause some kind of module damage to neutralize the enemy artillery. But unfortunately, the French premium artillery, as you saw there, had a lot of space modules and some armor. So instead of getting a penetrating hit and a high alpha strike, I essentially ended up splashing and low rolling him. So there goes my Top Gun. Well, as you can see with both games, I got ace tanker. But if anything, you can see the amount of damage I did were kind of modest in both cases, but I got quite a solid amount of spots and assists, which are things that people tend to overlook, but are ultimately very important. So there you go. That's why I did it. Perhaps I was a little lucky.